It's been a couple of weeks, but I think we looked at verses 21 through 28 briefly, if I can recall correctly. The conclusion. I guess I could always go back and watch the video, but that would mean me watching myself on camera, which is not something I really enjoy. So I've done it. It's not fun, but we'll go back. I think we gave it pretty short shrift 2 weeks ago, and we're going to come back to it the next week, but something else came up. So let's look at Exodus chapter 12, beginning of verse 21, and read through verse 28. Then Moses called for all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go and take for yourselves lambs according to your families, and slay the Passover lamb. You shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood which is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts, and none of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For the Lord will pass through to smite the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to come into your houses to smite you. And you shall observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. When you enter the land which the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children say to you, 'What does this rite mean to you?' you shall say, 'It is a Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the sons of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians, but spared our homes.' And the people bowed low and worshipped. Then the sons of Israel went and did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron. So they did." Okay. Any thoughts? Robin says hello. Hi, Robin. Hope you're home safe and everything from your travels, or joining us on the road, whichever you may be doing. She'll be home tomorrow, or
she'll leave again tomorrow.
Okay. She's getting around the town. I don't want you to say that like that. I'm sorry about that, but she's seeing a little bit of the world these days. That's good. It's a good time of the year to see some of the world.
It's always interesting when you reread things. You think you know the story pretty well. And when in verse 23, it says, when the Lord goes through the land, strike down the Egyptians with blood on top of the doorpost, and he will pass over the doorway, and he will not permit the destroyer to go in. So in other words, there was 2 of them, at least, in that process.
Or the destroyer could be understood as the agent, the angel of death, or whatever, as the mechanism, the apostle of God for this purpose, to send out and accomplish this task.
Yeah. In other words, what I guess I'm getting to is God didn't do the Lord didn't do the destroying, but the angel or whoever it was.
The Grim Reaper, yes.
Huh?
The Grim Reaper.
Whatever he is, didn't work. I don't know why it just never sunk into me. All I'm doing is taking up time. So
No, it's a good point. It's when the Lord acts, it's very, it happens, but many times when the Lord acts, there is an agent of the Lord that does what the Lord wants done. And of course, that has enormous implications for Christians today, that we are not the Lord. We don't go out into the world as Jesus, but we go out into the world in his name and as his agent. So we'll pause it for just, I don't want Dahlia to be too embarrassed here, and so it's no problem. The only person that really makes mad when it happens is Robert, so he's the one that gets upset. So. Well, sometimes it's a very important call. So it's not.
It does say though, you're gonna observe this rite and statute for you and for your sons forever. It
Okay.
doesn't have an end to the Jews and the sacrifice at all. So, being a Jew now, whether they're Christians or not, are they required to do this Passover feast?
That's a good point in terms, we talked about it a little bit the past couple of months in our look at Romans, where Paul is wrestling with the idea of exactly how do Christianity and Jewishness work together. And and what we've kind of looked at it from the perspective of how non-Jewish Christians view Israel, how they view the Jewish community. And, it has really important implications in terms of how our government has made foreign policy decisions, which has impacted not just Americans, that impacts the whole world. And so I'm not saying there's a way to get it right. I think there is certainly a way to get it wrong. And that's usually American foreign policy frequently gets it wrong. Occasionally maybe gets it a form of right. But it is, that's the issue. That's the way we've kind of looked at it. You're looking at it and bringing it up from the perspective of a person of Christian faith who is ethnically Jewish. And that's not something we encounter that often in the church today. I think I asked everybody in here a while back how many people know somebody who is Jewish. And I don't think anybody raised their hand. And yes, this is a kind of you know someone, Dolores, or okay. I've known a few and encountered a few in travels and things like that. But it was a very important question in the early church because the early church was made up almost exclusively of Jewish Christians. Jews, you could say Jews who were for Jesus, and I don't know everything there is to know about that group, so I'm not trying to hold them up or pull them down. I don't know anything about them really. So it's pretty clear, I think, when we look at the early church that the Jewish Christians continue to observe most of the Jewish traditions. They continue to circumcise their children. They continue to observe the feasts, the rituals of purification. It appears from some of the histories and everything, my understanding anyway, is that they would go to synagogue on Saturday and Christian worship on Sunday. So they certainly clung to their Jewish traditions early on. And I don't know that this is the place to get into this thoroughly now. That caused a real problem as the church became more diverse, as Gentiles became Christians as well. And the question that really arose was not, should Jewish Christians keep being Jewish? The question arose is, to what extent do Gentile Christians need to become Jewish? That was the battle that was actually fought. And that's where we get some of the edicts and things like the Council of Jerusalem, I should say. And again, we'll talk maybe more about that some other time. But that was the issue. So they were Christians who continued observing the Jewish traditions. And so I think it's not so much a question of do they have to. I think it's a question if they want to. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think that's their, that it's, we have cultural observances in our practice, in our culture, in our society that are not strictly religious based, but we, that's why the first or second Sunday of every February, we're all sitting around a television for 4 hours watching very expensive commercials with some guys in tight pants running around in between and all that. You know, that's some leather obelisk being thrown around and all that. So, you know, there's a cultural component to it, and it's also still their genetic history. It's their, as a people, their history, and there's no doubt that being Jewish, just that fact of being Jewish, has impacted their lives at a very basic level throughout their history as a people. I mean, they have had a rough go of it for most of recorded history, most of recorded Western history anyway. They've never been the most popular minority in a culture. They are probably more favored in America now than they've ever been, and there's still a lot of anti-Semitic things that happened. There was a shooting, I think a mass shooting in a synagogue in Seattle. You're not going to find a more progressive and tolerant and liberal city in America, I think, really, than Seattle. And they still have a problem with, and sometimes on the what we label as progressive now, they have a bigger problem with Israel than really anybody else because of the current political struggles between Israel and primarily they're another minority within Israel, which are the Palestinians. I mean, they're Israelites too, or really Israelis, I guess is a better term for them. Now they're Israelis, Israeli citizens, and yet it's complicated, and I'm not going to try to solve that problem. I'm not getting paid enough, honestly, to solve that problem. Y'all pay me just fine, but I'm not complaining about my paycheck. I'm just saying if I could fix that, I could make a whole lot more. So, that's it's a valid point. And of course, this isn't put in the context of remembering you're Jewish if you want to. You know, this is an institution, something that is commanded again to be observed perpetually. And there's some other things in the Old Testament prophecies and promises that are made. This is yours forever. And so to just dismiss, you know, my experience has been that in our tradition, it is to very much minimize the promises of God made to Israel, that they're done and dusted, that's something in the past, and we don't want to hurt anybody. We don't want to discriminate against anybody, but we're not going to discriminate for anybody either based on their ethnicity. How well we've lived up to that, I don't know. But that was the general consensus when I was growing up among the Bible class teachers and the preachers that I heard. And they didn't get into it that often, but that was the kind of Israel as the promised people, the chosen people, is done. And it ended when Jesus died. It ended certainly when the Pentecost church was founded, and from there forth, it's just kind of wriggling around, but mortally wounded. I think that is a simple way to look at it. I don't know that it's a right way. There's a lot of answers to difficult questions that are very simple, and usually they're not right, but they're very simple, so they have that appeal. There is these and maybe we don't ever really come to an answer on it, and maybe it's something that every Jewish person has to maybe decide for themselves. I'm a Christian. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God, the Messiah, the chosen one. He died for my sins. I've been baptized. I'm a practicing. I go to take the Lord's Supper weekly, whatever. And yet I'm still Jewish. You know, like I've sent my DNA in to 23andMe, and I'm Ashkenazi Jew. So, and my grandparents were in the Holocaust or whatever, and survived it or whatever, and all of that. What should they do? I don't know that we should or could give them a definitive answer on that. Let the word speak to them as it speaks to them. And Paul's guidance seems to be more if people want to celebrate a holiday, let them. If you want to keep a day holy, keep it holy. And if you don't, keep it holy. That's your call too. I think Paul's ultimate concern is a little bit different than most of the other church leaders early on. Paul's ultimate concern is that the Jewish Christians are going to think or remain or view their salvation based on their ethnicity rather than on Christ. That it's going to be in keeping the works of the law rather than faith in Jesus Christ. And so he's worried. That's his concern and what he's trying to push back from. He advocates primarily for the acceptance and inclusion of Gentile Christians as fully Christians, as fully children of God, whether they're circumcised or not, whether they keep kosher or not, whether they do all of the stuff that the Jewish people did. And we'll look at that maybe in more detail at another time if we haven't looked at it exhaustively already. But
Well, I think your point that it's not as quick as an answer as one might think. My immediate sense was if they're a Christian now, there are aspects of the Jewish tradition that they no longer need to keep because they don't, those, the old law was nailed to the cross aspect of some of those traditions. But then like you say, you look at, the traditions, and in Romans 14:5, Paul says that if you're gonna, those that want to keep holiday, well, let me quote it. One person esteems one day as better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. And so there again, he's saying if the Jews want to keep this day special, or I guess for the Gentiles, if they had a special day that they wanted to keep, that's fine. But I don't, I'm thinking there are some aspects that a Christian Jew would not necessarily need to keep anymore, and may indeed not want to keep because of their religious tent to them, if you will, because it'd be celebrating the law more than it would be.
well, yeah, it's doubtful that they get back to Jerusalem 3 times a year, every year. It's doubtful. So much of the Mosaic law was to be practiced or understood with the idea of Israel in control of Jerusalem, or in control, or together as a nation with a defined capital, and practicing the sacrifices and all that in their worship in the consecrated place with the high priest. I mean, the high priest is I'm assuming there's a high priest now. I don't really know that much about it, but we have a synagogue, half a mile from here, basically, right down Poplar here. And I've never seen a car parked in the parking lot there. They do have to have, I think they have a quorum and a number they have to have to even meet. I think there are some Jewish people in the community. There's a few names I've seen that sound a little Jewish to me, and it's their business, not mine. But I don't think they have probably wouldn't have the Mosaic law authority to have the full Day of Atonement and bring in bulls and goats and start slitting throats and having all the blood running out everywhere here in Walla Walla. So I don't know how much of the actual Mosaic law, very many of them keep. A lot of them keep the diet. There's still quite a few people who try to, and you can find it in really big cities like New York. homes where they have 2 separate kitchens because they'll keep meat in one and dairy in another kitchen, in a whole different room in the house. Where real estate is a real premium, they're putting 2 kitchens in their house. I mean, we make fun of it. Sometimes I've heard people joke about all that stuff, and I don't think we've got any right to make fun of it. I mean, it is a very much a dedicated act of devotion by people trying to keep that. And I'm sure there's some Islamic parallels to that in terms of dietary things. And again, before we start making fun of how picky they are about what they eat, how picky are you about what you eat? You know, how many? Yeah, just because that's gross. You know, one of the current things all the kids say is, "I will not eat bugs," because evidently they're trying to push eating grasshoppers as a protein source going forward because they're sustainable and all of that. And they're eaten all over the world. People eat grasshoppers all over the world. John the Baptist ate grasshoppers. They're clean. They're kosher. So you can eat grasshoppers, but doesn't sound too good, does it? I mean, it's not real. I think it's those wings get stuck between your teeth. That's the really hard part. But so, yeah, there's if you go to Mexico, if you want to eat pre-Columbian Mexican food, it's probably going to be, you're probably going to eat ants. They eat a lot of ants. Ant eggs, you know. So, I mean, that's, people haven't always gone out and killed the biggest, baddest, cleanest animal in the world. That's hard. You know, it's hard to kill a healthy animal. It's easier to get bugs. It's easier to get, frankly, a dead animal, you know, and carve off a piece of him. You know, when you're looking back before they had 30-06 rifles and all that stuff, you know, when they're trying to do things the old-fashioned way. You know, the Plains Indians, they ate buffalo, but they really got to be buffalo people after they got guns, after they got horses. It's hard to keep up with the buffalo on foot and do it and kill it and bring your whole family along. So they could send a party out ahead and then bring it back. That was a little bit easier. So these dietary things change over time, and we're used to whatever it is we're used to eating. And I know some people who grew up eating things that they would not eat now. I'm kind of just the opposite. I grew up, I was a picky eater, kind of. I eat anything now, you know, basically. I don't really, I'll eat, you know, organ meat and all that stuff. It's all good to me now. But it's, when I was a kid, I'm not eating that. I would, you know. Now, as you could tell, even as a kid, I got plenty to eat. Maybe that was one reason I could be so picky. But there's people today, there's kids today that think the only part of a chicken that's fit to eat is the nugget. And so I don't know. That's the only part you want to eat. I haven't found a bad part of chicken yet, personally, but that's me. So these commandments about being forever, you know, and we think of God in terms of eternal. And when he says forever, meaning forever, you know, when does forever end? You know, so rather than saying, well, and I believe Paul's argumentation is certainly that the hope for eternal salvation, now that Christ has died and risen from the dead and ascended to the Father, the hope for eternal salvation is faith in Jesus Christ for all. I am not a pluralist. I am a respect everybody, and if they're comfortable with it, let them live their life as long as they're not trying to hurt me with it. And I'll try not to hurt them with what I have to say. So I have had my classes like this, and other ones have been attended by people who believe very strongly in the Mosaic and observing the Mosaic law, at least to a large extent. And I can say so far, they've told me I was very respectful of it, and that's my hope. I can respect your views even if I don't agree with them, and hopefully I ask for the same in return. If you don't agree with me, that's fine, but please be respectful. And I think it's difficult. I think it's, to keep these things perpetually, and how it reinforces to new generations of Israelites, this is what God did for you. And again, we've talked about it already early in the chapter, though. The Passover lamb is not one from out in the flocks necessarily. It's one from right on your front door. So telling the whole story, and when you stop telling part of the story and you only tell another part of the story, you have to really guard against, we're not telling the story at all. We're telling something very different. And when you're not, cooking the lamb like they say and eating it like they said, but the whole family is sitting around a very nice table, and there's a rack of lamb, and that's all that you're eating is a rack of lamb, and all these wonderful side dishes besides the stuff you're supposed to eat. You can tell the story, but is the story getting lost a little bit in the memorial components that are supposed to be telling the story as well, that you're eating, that are supposed to reinforce the story and give rise to the question, why are we doing this? So that question can be answered. As people of faith, one thing we should get really comfortable with is answering questions.
We're commanded to be able to.
Yes, but we need to get where we're kind of good at it.
Yeah.
Rather than stifling questions, rather than saying, well, that's not really important right now, or it may be important to them, and you may be uncomfortable with it, but they may be completely comfortable with it. And you may not have the perfect answer, and that's okay too. Not everybody who retold this story probably got every part of it right. They're doing it by oral tradition. So, but when you change the story to some extent, when your Passover feast is not a lamb from your own flocks that you keep tied to your front door for 4 days before you slaughter it, and you eat every part of it, and you put the blood on your door, when it's just, you go down to the kosher butcher and get a rack of lamb. Now, some of that is just basically accommodating the reality of your situation, perhaps. And the Jews did that. But some of it is, we're losing some pretty important parts of the story too when we do this. When you change the elements, you're changing the story, at least to some extent. And I'm not saying you can't, but you need to be mindful of that.
I was thinking, previous studies that we've had in here about the sacrifices that the Jews did. That was one of the things I learned from Darius, was the fact that always in my mind, it was the priests that did the killing. It wasn't. They did certain killings, but also the ones that the Jews that came to do the sacrifice, brought their animal, slit the throat, or whatever it was that they had to do. So it really brought it up better to me that each Jew at that time, to do it correctly, was very much involved in the spilling of blood, the sacrifice itself. So I think what I see here is that same idea of thought that you will bring up a Jew today, if all they're doing is going and getting that rack of lamb, they're really not seeing the spilling of blood that is, to me, the important part of this whole thing. Because why? It leads to Christ and what he did. What was spilled for our sins. So there is a continuity that if you cut it too short, that you don't see, that you don't get.
Yeah, and I want to be, those are all good points, and hopefully I haven't gone too far. I would never tell them that what they're doing isn't valid.
Right. But I'm saying for us here today,
I'm
studying this,
yeah.
we need to be aware that we don't gloss over something.
Yes.
Say, oh, that's not important. Well, if God gave the commandment to the Jews to do that, there was a reason. And if we can understand that reason, hopefully we can be even better Christians today and understand the whole story, not just
Well, the Jewish community has not asked for my opinion on these things. Y'all are kind of paying me for my opinion on these things. So I'm telling y'all, and I would just say that that's a point to consider, that once you start accommodating your practice to the realities of your circumstance, you have to be careful about, are we even really telling the story? And if we're not telling the same story, what story are we telling? And is that helpful or hurtful? So that's, I think, something that is worthy of consideration. And I would put that forth to any group in that discussion, which they don't even care what I think. So that's fine with me too. But it is an important observance for them at the time. It is the signal to God that we are your people. We believe that you are for us. We also believe that obedience to your word brings about salvation. Sounds like a lot of work to do just to end up with some blood on your doorposts. But you do it because God has commanded you to do it, not because that's the color you picked your doorposts out to be, faded, dried lamb's blood on there. So there is this, it's a ritual that does not actually, in a sense, in and of itself accomplish anything, but through the power of God, it gives life. It saves from death. It gives life in the salvation from death rather than creating a new life. It simply spares judgment. It spares punishment. So it's a very meaningful observance. I really thought we'd get a little bit farther today, but that's okay. We've got a couple more minutes. Just a couple of final thoughts. Well, it's a worthy thought and a worthy question. And I'm not, there are a lot of groups out there that right now that say, if you're not pro-Israel, you're not a Christian. And there's a lot of Christians right now that say, if you're not pro-Palestine, you're not a Christian. If you support Israel in any way, you're not a Christian. So once again, there's all of these extremes, and our culture right now is embracing extremism. It's embracing running to the farthest pole you can get to. And that's, to some extent, we think these are just intellectual arguments that don't really matter, but in other ways, they really do matter. And I wish we could say, well, what they all need is just Jesus, but they can look at us and say, well, you